Good afternoon, everybody. This is Neal Conlon here at AppGuard headquarters in New York City. Thank you, everybody, for taking a little bit of time out of their Thanksgiving week. We recognize that this week is obviously more of a quieter week than most, hopefully for everybody, but we also wanted to build off of some really interesting momentum that we've had since the beginning of the summer, where we host these webinars once a month. Well, we have two of them a month, actually. The first one of the month is a technical demo where we run through AppGuard's technology and we run through the marketing and the salesmanship part of cybersecurity. This webinar is dedicated to CISOs. And we pick topics that are submitted to us, and then we put together a group of either CISOs or people who play in that space, and we just get on the phone and have a very conversational, hour or so about a specific topic that has a real-time importance to it, and it's been really successful. So I say that for a couple of reasons. One, if you're on the phone and you think that there is a cybersecurity topic that folks should be talking about and have not been addressing properly, I would love for you to send them to us. It helps if you're an expert in the topic, or it helps if you are not an expert in the topic and just think that there's a message out there that needs to be said. We then curate those ideas and then dig into our, I guess I would say, community of CISOs that we've been working with, as well as folks who work in the cybersecurity space, CIOs, security architects, the legal side, et cetera, and then as long as we've got some interest and can deliver some real value, then we will put that topic on our roadmap, and then our marketing department will execute it. In our last webinar, in case you were not able to join in, we talked about the Chinese hardware hack, and we had Mark Kelton, former head of counterintelligence for the CIA, Bob Bigman, former CIO of the CIA, and then we had Congressman Mike Rogers, who ran the Intelligence Committee during Obama's administration, and then we had our in-house PhD, Fatih, discuss about some of the solutions that we have in place that may be helpful. So if you're interested in seeing that webinar, and if you can't find it on LinkedIn or on our website, drop us an email, and I'll make sure that somebody on our marketing team will get it over to you to listen to. It's a pretty compelling interview. We had a few hundred people on the phone, and it was pretty compelling. All that said, I wanted to keep the topic this week kind of light, a little bit fun, and a little bit out there. So this week I have the privilege and honor of having Karen Andersen from Eve Bailey. She's the manager of cybersecurity services, as well as Theresa Semmens, who's the chief information security officer, assistant vice president for University of Miami. There's probably some good cyber frat stories for Miami, I bet, but maybe she's got those built up in her repertoire of stories. And then I'm Neal Conlon, and then I believe we have Fatih on the phone as well. Fatih, are you there? I should have done a sound check beforehand. All right, I think Fatih's going to join us here in a few minutes. If not, we'll have somebody ping him. So this week's topic is about craziest web hacks, and I kind of just want to set the stage here for everybody. For anybody who knows a little or a lot about cybersecurity, there are many, many ways to hack into a system or an infrastructure. And one of the things that resonates with me, and I know many folks on this phone call have had a similar training, but I believe it stems from the military, is when I was going through Marine Corps training, they would show a light bulb, a single light that was going, it was lit or working in a room. And one of the scenarios they would put you through is asking you, how many ways are there to turn off this light bulb without touching it. And as you get better at playing this game, you learn that there is the light bulb can be shot, the wire can be cut, the power to the house could be cut off, the power plant could be shut down, the source of the electricity could be knocked out. And it just kind of becomes endless on the various ways that hackers can stop a system from operating the way it's supposed to, as long as they understand the root and understand how to get from system to system. And as cybersecurity gets more and more complex, from time to time, there's a crazy, funny, cryptic story that ultimately becomes true. And so I'll open up with a story that I'm sure several people on this phone call have also heard before, but it's near and dear to me because in one of my former companies, it was this company became a client after this happened. So there's the craziest cyber story that I have heard recently involves a real estate company in Texas that had a very successful year, and the CEO of the company went around and had given everybody a very nice bonus and had maxed out on all the great stuff that he could. And then he was thinking of how else can I make the company feel appreciated and have us kind of be prouder of what we've done. And so he goes, I know what I'm going to do. We're going to get this big, huge fish tank in the reception area, like 1,000-gallon fish tank. And so he goes out to the operations person and he says, I want to put in a $1,000 or 1,000-gallon fish tank. And I want it to be salt water, have these amazing fish. And I want every employee to come in and be like, wow, we've got this amazing fish tank. This is the type of company we are. And so they go out and they find the most well-known aquarium guy in town. They bring him in. They say, we want to spend a bunch of money on this fish tank. And he goes, sky's the limit. Spend whatever you need to spend. So over the next few weeks, they install this big fish tank. And the aquarium guy, who's been doing aquariums for a bunch of years, sees this as an opportunity to explore and play with IoT devices. And so he goes out and he buys several aquarium IoT devices, one so he can control the temperature of the tank, one that he can check the pH and the toxicity of the water from his phone, so he doesn't have to come there and check it on his own, and a couple other things, sensors that he puts in the device. And so while the tank is filled with water, and while there's fish already in the fish tank, he comes back a couple days later and installs these devices, walks over to the receptionist and says, hey, receptionist, what's your Wi-Fi password so that I can install these IoT devices into your fish tank, and so I don't have to come over here and check the toxicity of the water every week. And she hands over the company login that she uses for the receptionist area. And he installs them, he leaves, they have a ribbon cutting ceremony, everybody's super proud and super happy of this very expensive fish tank and very impressed with these IoT devices they put into the business. 6 weeks later, they recognize that there has been a breach in the company, a copy of their CRM, as well as a couple copies of their transactional data, as well as various forms of malware had been inserted into this company. And it was the first time they had even had an attempted breach that they knew of in a couple of years. So they had put a sophisticated cyber security methodology in place. They had several tools in place, as well as artificial intelligence, machine learning mechanisms, and some automation processes as well. Ultimately, they brought in a cyber threat intelligence firm, as well as a forensics team. And I'm sure for anyone on the phone, you realize by now what they ultimately figured out is that there was a vulnerability in the IoT devices that nobody in the security team or nobody in the IT team was even aware that they had been installed or that they were running. So much information, and this was so well architected that the forensics team had filed a complaint with the local police department And for a couple of months, excuse me, they investigated the aquarium company because they thought that they were on a payroll or had done this on purpose or had done it in some way. And ultimately, it was just a matter of poor planning, poor understanding, and poor implementation of processes, and ultimately a handful of human errors. Now, I think that's just crazy, right? Because none of the people involved in that conversation were were thinking about cybersecurity, number one. And number two, it's just crazy to me that all of your data can leak out of the fish tank over time. So that's my craziest cybersecurity story. I've got a bunch more we could talk about as we go on. But Karen or Theresa, any immediate aha moments out of that? Does that sound crazy to you?
Well, I just had an aha moment. This is Karen. So, hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. So, my first thought, Neal, is really that's kind of a fishy story. The puns don't really get any better. I'll just let you know in advance. You had
Well
a very
done.
important point there. Thank you. I think what you've really touched upon, which people really need to pay attention to, is regardless of the sophistication and the number of tools, the processes, a lot of times it's those unexpected human elements or things that you really hadn't thought about that kind of send you sideways. So one of the stories that I want to share, and I love sharing stories from people in the industry, spent a lot of time in electronic discovery and some fairly significant data breaches. This one's slightly different, but to get people to think about how sometimes the most common things can lead to something much bigger. So this story unfolded in another country, which will remain unnamed, and it was basically some passengers in the back of a cab. So they're going back to the airport in the back of the cab. And to set the stage, these people were on an elevated freeway in the back of a cab and they're stuck in traffic. So if you think about any of the times you're trying to get back to the airport, traffic's simply crawling, you can't get anywhere. So frustrating. Suddenly, two ninja-looking motorcyclists on bullet bikes pull up on either side of the cab and they take the laptops of the people who are in the back of the cab. Now, what's interesting is this was a well-known phenomenon in the area, and the passengers had previously been warned, whatever you do, don't take your laptops out of your backpacks because this is a common practice. Well, you get stuck in traffic, you get a little bored, you can't help but pull out the laptop, so they did exactly what they were warned not to do, and sure enough, here comes these two ninjas on either side of the cab. They rob the laptops at gunpoint, and then they abscond with them, and they make off through the lanes of stuck traffic because they're on motorcycles. Now, here's where this gets even more interesting. The three laptops that were stolen were the latest and greatest from a manufacturer with functionality which had not yet been released domestically in this country. So, some people on the inside had this intel and they started watching the dark web for the sales of these devices, which had the noted features because there's nobody in the country who should have these types of laptops. Once they started watching the dark web and they saw the ad with these laptops for sale, they sent a skilled collector who was very good at collecting items to the person who had them for sale, and they were able to retrieve two of the three stolen laptops. But the simplicity of the story is it all could have been avoided if they had simply listened to the warning and left their PCs in the backpack.
Ooh, yeah. That's what we teach our children, right? Don't touch that. And it obviously doesn't work that well moving forward.
No.
Fantastic. That all I had in my head was like a very James Bond like scenario of like black leather motorcyclists like ripping laptops away from a little taxi. I love that. That's fantastic.
Right? Such simplicity.
Theresa, actually, hold on one second. I know, Fatih, I believe you joined. Fatih, can I ask you, as we're doing our craziest web hacks, to just do a quick introduction of yourself, and then we'll continue on with our content?
Yes,
I think you're.
Yes, I'm the CTO, and I'm heading the research and development in our AppGuard Inc. I'm also working with our parent company, acting as the global CTO for Blue Planet Works. Primarily, our focus is malware research, advanced techniques to defeat insider threats, as well as V2X, V2I, IoT space in Japan and some other countries in the Asia region.
Thank you, Fatih, very much. So I know you joined a little bit late. So far we've got a story about data leakage leaking out of the fish tank. We have a James Bond-like scenario of stealing laptops and finding the identifiers on the dark web. And now we'll shift over to Theresa and see what kind of fraternity Miami stories you have around web hacking.
Good afternoon. I don't know if I can match Karen's story. That just sounds like something right out of the script for a movie. Wow. I've been at the University of Miami approximately a year and a half. Prior to that, I spent 14 years at a public higher ed institution up in the northern part of the state, kind of close to where Karen's from. And I've lots of stories from that. IoT is one of them. We had built a brand new STEM, state-of-the-art classroom for science, technology, engineering, and math. And of course, that had everything was digitally connected, including lights, heat, you name it, sound. And we had been running our tools for problems. Sure enough, every last one of those little IoT devices that monitored for lights, heat, stuff was showing to be scanning. And we found out that they had been infected with malware. So we had the person responsible for those devices take them down, clean them, and reinstall the image. Put them back up. The next day, they're doing the same thing. So we sat down with the person to visit with him, and what had happened is he had failed to change the default login and password. It's just those simple things that if you take the time to do that can prevent such occurrences. Another one would be crypto mining. The institution I was at had a top-ranked football team, and the league they're in requires them to share videos of team practice, team games, and so forth. So it's quite a setup, vendor managed. And the server that worked with converting the video into something that anybody could watch got compromised, and a keystroke logger was put on it. So the video technician who was responsible for it logged in with his general username and password. He didn't have a special username and password, and the person was able, or the fisher, whoever it was able to take those credentials, and he was able to bring down all of our Active Directory. We had 2,400 systems become a problem, and it took us weeks to clean that up. And it was all because the vendor failed to do due diligence in making sure that those systems were patched and up to date and current. Had the vendor done that, that wouldn't have happened.
Well, that really speaks to the notion of vendor management, doesn't it?
It does, yes.
Absolutely. So definitely appreciate that. I'm trying to think of a good pun to keep our pun story going, but we need to come back to that one, I guess.
Well, you could always say, let's keep the lights on.
Oh, there you go. I've got a damn hacking story, a damn hack. Would you like to hear it?
Oh, I have another one too.
Excellent. Would you like to go first?
Oh, you're so kind. I have some friends who are ethical hackers. They're paid to go in and attack systems. And as they were doing this, they ran across an oil well located in the middle of the U.S. Everything on it was wide open. So anybody could access it. They could they could have done any number of things, including destroying the well. But being ethical, they contacted the company and told them what the problem was and asked them to remediate. So the moral of this story is you have to be conscious of what you're doing, and you have to have an IT technician who has security first and foremost when they set those up.
And the ethics to go along with it, right? That ethics piece that trips me up every time.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. All right, so here's my damn story. In 2016, some Iranian hackers decided to launch a pretty sophisticated denial of service attack on the financial sector here in the U.S., and they were quite successful. They took down quite a big chunk of the internet, and they really went after some pretty significant banks, and some of you probably remember this. It's in 2016. What also happened at the same time is one of these Iranian hackers found that he was able to reach a dam from the internet. So he's at home, surfing on his couch, finds he can actually hit this dam. Now, what's interesting about this is, you know how the media is, you start to hear, oh my goodness, there was a dam that was breached, and this dam was actually in upstate New York. And the world goes crazy because it's New York City, critical infrastructure, oh my goodness, this could be horrific. But what's actually kind of funny is it's a tiny little dam in upstate New York, and the poor gentleman who happened to be the mayor at the time, it was a volunteer position. He knows nothing about cybersecurity. He doesn't even know what people are talking about, and suddenly he finds himself all over. He's on CNN. His brother-in-law's at the airport in Florida, and he's like, oh my goodness, why is he on the news? There's a big cyber breach and critical infrastructure. And so they're trying to figure out what made these Iranians target this tiny little sluice gate. And that's all it was a small sluice gate in upstate New York. And after doing a little more digging, they found out they had actually confused this structure with a structure which had a similar name, which was the name Bowman. The Arthur R. Bowman Dam, which is on the Crooked River in Oregon, completely other side of the country, is much larger and massive, and you could do some pretty significant data if you were able to take control of that sluice gate. So they have this tiny little one. The other thing that they didn't realize is that this sluice gate wouldn't have been able to have really been breached anyhow because it was not connected. It was going through some repairs. The way they were able to access it is there was a cellular modem that had been installed, which no one was even aware of. So they were able to monkey around a little bit with the cellular modem, but they weren't really able to do anything. But it's so fascinating the way this stuff comes out in the news, and it became really a discussion about, oh my goodness, what if somebody could hack our critical infrastructure? So I felt really bad for the poor mayor of this volunteer position, doesn't even know what cyber means, and suddenly he's in the hot spot across the country.
That's a good damn story. That's a good one. That I mean, I think they've all been good, but that's the best pun yet for sure. Fatih, how about you? I mean, you probably have hundreds of crazy web hacks and stories, but I'm curious to see if you would like to, or if you don't, would just like to listen, would like to contribute a web hack story that folks may be interested in.
Yes, I'm more interested in how malware itself contributes and defeats the existing systems, defense systems. One malware that I involved in a breach case very much was fascinating, because this was, it may not be a the hacking story, but it's a very interesting hacking story at the same time from the analysis standpoint. This malware was delivered by some form of phishing kind of attack. At the time, they were using BDS systems and sandboxes and everything. Somehow this bypassed these things. And they had a very interesting capability where this malware was able to detect the presence of some EDR systems, and it was basically generating amount of data, especially the memory operations, such that the EDR systems were having tremendous difficulty catching up with that. In a matter of couple of minutes, the data on these endpoints growing in the order of like gigabytes. So it was coming to a point that the systems were not able to handle. These endpoints were generating immense amount of data. So this is a very interesting story that beyond the breach, but the adversaries are also very much prepared for the tools and building not only defenses against these, but also establishing kind of DDoS kind of scenarios using the existing defense tools available on the enterprises. So this was a kind of EDR, anti-EDR kind of malware, detecting the presence and attacking those endpoints, as a result generating tremendous amount of data that overwhelms the entire EDR system at the end. So this is a quite interesting twist maybe, but just want to share this. It was fascinating.
And that's the thing. So many of these different incidents are fascinating. You don't know how it's going to happen or what you're going to learn from it. I think another thing that people should really think about is something as simple as an insider, because so often we think about malware, things coming from external threats, foreign countries, these types of things. Here's another story that happened here in the U.S. And for me, I found it a little amusing. Some of you may have heard of it. But more than 100 drivers in Austin, Texas, suddenly found their cars had been disabled, or in the middle of the night, their horn started honking out of control, which is kind of unusual. So initially, they started to get all of these complaints, and they thought it was some type of a mechanical failure. So as they started to look into this, they realized that, wait a second, we suddenly have over 100 customers at one time complaining the horns are going off in the middle of the night, they have to remove the battery, they're basically making the car a brick, and they don't understand what's this coincidence that's happening to everyone at the same time. So if you start to do some of your investigations, which is what you do in a data breach, they found that the dealership had been using a system that's called WebTech Plus. And what this allows the dealership to do, they were a dealership that was really focused on people who did not have great credit. And so in order to have a way to repo the vehicle if they weren't paying for it, they established a tracking device. So this tracking device also allowed you to either prohibit the car from being started, or you could trigger the horn to begin honking. And this is exactly what happened. So this is supposed to be a friendly way to remind people to make the payments on their cars because they don't have great credit, and to also make sure that you could repossess the car if you needed to. So as the police are looking into this and trying to figure out why is this happening in one particular area of Austin with over 100 cars at the same time, I'm sure some of you can probably guess. A number of days earlier, their sysadmin had been fired because he had gotten into some trouble and he became a disgruntled employee. He was able to find a way to log back into the network, not via his own login, but from somebody else he knew. And what he did is he reset the admin password so that when he went ahead and set all of these devices off on all of the cars they had sold, all of the clients were impacted at the same time. But it took him a number of days to figure out why is this happening. But can you imagine, in the middle of the night, all of a sudden your car alarm starts going off and you can't do anything to stop it, and it's happening to all of your customers at the same time. So you really have to think about some of these scenarios that, if I'm letting somebody go, maybe think about would they take any actions back against the company for retribution.
I don't know. I think I know a couple people I might want to learn that one for.
Useful for kids.
So both of you raised a very, very valid point that I just wanted to pause and address for a second and regroup on. Is that as sophisticated as the cyber security ecosystem and landscape has become for the white hat and for the good guys, the piece that we don't think about often or measure well enough is that the type of technology, the type of artificial intelligence, the ability for the malware and the hackers to morph or be built in a different way to address things where you have malware that is now able to identify EDR is on the system, or you have disgruntled employees socially engineering, whether it's a vindictive way to get back or a criminal way to get back at the business when they just don't share aligned values. right? And that's the most complex thing about it. I'll grab the reins here for a second. I want to share a very interesting social engineering hack that I've heard several times, and mostly in small, high-end hedge funds and financial services firms, where they will have spent a bunch of money on cybersecurity and think that they are buttoned up pretty well, and even to the point where they have fobs in order for you to log in, lots of MFA integrations, very, very tight security blanket over a very small group of people. We're talking usually less than 500 employees, and they're usually considered high-end employees, and therefore, even during the hiring process, they are screened so that the chances of somebody who's a high-end employee working in a high-end environment is supposed to be much, much less than other lower wage resources and employees working in high-risk environments. But let's just say that hedge fund manager, and this is true story, is disgruntled because the state of the market is that he's not been making the money that he used to make in his fund, and he complains to a friend outside of the universe, and they say, well, why don't we have a conversation and figure out a way to kind of suck some information and make some transactions happen outside of the environment? And why don't you just go on, give me your password and login, and why don't you just go on vacation for a couple of days to Disney World, and make sure you post pictures of that on your Instagram, on your Facebook, et cetera, et cetera. And so what happens is that this fund manager, who is in a stage of his life where he is stressed out financially, or maybe it's just a roadmap for his profession, compromises himself and books those trips and takes a family vacation at Disney World, and makes sure that he's got pictures on Facebook of him and his kids with the Goofy hat that weekend. While that is all going on, his now business partner was able to log into the system and able to facilitate cash transactions and make changes in the system, and ultimately have millions of dollars flow out the door while the hedge fund manager is singing "It's a Small World After All." He comes back from that vacation and is chastised, and people try to understand what has happened. And the whole time he's adamant about pulling up his iPhone and showing his Instagram pictures of saying there's no way it could have been me because I was on a floating raft 10,000 leagues under the sea the whole time this was going on. This is actually a hack that I've heard multiple versions of it, but happens very, very often. All right. Theresa, do you have another one on there?
Do I have another one on there? Well, mine deal primarily with higher ed. So several years ago, we had a professor who was teaching an IT course, and she told each of her students to find a tool and investigate it, research it, play with it, and report back to us. So one of the students chose to use a password cracking tool and run it in a computer cluster where it's full of students.
It sounds like a bad idea.
Yeah, no kidding. To see if he could, if that student could pull up all the usernames and passwords. Lucky for us, we had a monitor and we were able to stop it. However, the point is, students need to be taught ethics, and it's up to the instructor to teach those ethics. And if you're going to run those types of programs, they need to be run in a closed environment, not in an open environment. But it's not, when you stop and think about it, most of these tools are run in an open environment, and they're run against us. So we need to be cautious of that.
Well, I hope the person got a good grade, because it's a very valuable lesson learned, right?
Actually, he failed.
Oh, no. Well, he's definitely ingenious. Maybe he can come up with another career.
and he got caught, so he failed multiple times there.
No doubt. But I think you're spot on, both of you, talking about the different ways that people, find ways to be vulnerable or to exploit the vulnerable. And Neal, kind of to dovetail on your story, there's another story of a real estate investment firm which lost over $1 million. This one I find kind of interesting. I don't mean to make light of it from an amusing standpoint, but when you think about how naive people still are, even at this day, with the number of breaches we've had. So in this particular one, a gentleman had a compromised email account, and the people who compromised his email account, they sat and they watched the different exchanges he had with his bookkeeper. Pretty smart. So they started to realize, hey, let's watch and see what he does so that we can go ahead and send some wire transfers. And the other thing that they did is they went ahead and they grabbed his Outlook calendar. So what they did with this is, because they had the access to the Outlook calendar, they could very safely impersonate the CEO, write the emails telling his bookkeeper to transfer the funds and with the appropriate bank account, and they made sure that they could respond to any questions the bookkeeper had. And then they were smart enough to go ahead and delete these communications before the gentleman returned from his meeting and checked his email. So he's off at meetings. Now, as they started to realize this was happening, the CEO and the owner is trying to wonder, how exactly is this happening? Because the interesting thing seems to be that every time one of these wire transfers is sent is when I'm in a meeting. And that's exactly what they did. They watched his calendar. They knew when he would be unavailable for an amount of time. And they went ahead and they sent these things. And they were very crafty at spoofing the same way he would ask for any other wire transfer. So the bookkeeper thought they were doing the right thing, but I thought it was pretty ingenious of them to go ahead and make it look like it was him. He's not available to see the emails. They erased the evidence of it, and so it took them quite an amount of time to figure out what happened and how they did it. They actually wire transferred the money to a foreign country, so it was not able to have been retrieved. Unfortunately, this is a very common kind of fraud, and more than 8,000 companies have been victimized in a similar type of scheme in just 2 years.
I would say that one, if you're saying the number is 8,000, I'm sure the true number of people that don't report it is probably double or triple that, because that's definitely a rampant challenge for people. It's also pretty crazy,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, they don't report. Because it's embarrassing, and so you're right. The numbers are under-reported.
Ooh, so I want to share an embarrassing social engineering web hack that if anyone uses this against somebody when their significant other specifically, do not trace it back to me, because it's a great one.
Okay, I'm going to take
notes. We have blackmail.
Oh, you said this is being recorded.
Right. All right. Maybe I shouldn't use this one, but I think this is one of the best ones that I've actually ever witnessed. Actually, a lot of companies will be locked down in what seems and feels to the average employee like a very secure way. And going back to the folks that are the ethical hackers, there's obviously people out there that are not ethical hackers and get very immersive and challenged and like the idea of figuring out countermeasures and ways to get into infrastructures. And so I've heard of hacks taking place where there is a device called a rubber ducky, which is basically a USB drive that has the ability to launch malware and take over machines, as well as store other information on it. And while it may be true that many machines within people's businesses they lock down their USBs, obviously at some point somebody in the executive team will say, "Hey, I need my USB," or "I need access to run my USB." And so what hackers have figured out ways to social engineer your Instagram and Facebook information, and then convert it into a way to create an insider scenario. So the scenario I've heard is that there was an executive management team at a financial services firm, and more than a handful of the executive team happened to be into exotic cars. And so there was a hacker who was trying to get into the system for something. They had tried all of the traditional paths, I guess you would call that, and to no avail, it was not working. And so ultimately what they concocted is this idea where they went into the Instagrams and social media feeds of this executive team, figured out that some of them liked Bugattis and Ferraris, and they ultimately took this rubber ducky device and loaded it with some malware, as well as a bunch of pictures of Bugattis, Ferraris, et cetera, Lamborghinis. And then they took the USB drive, put a little Post-it note on it with paper, labeled it as Exotic Car Show, and then went ahead and recreated this USB drive like 10, 15, 20 times. And then every day for a week or two, the hacker would go up in the elevator to this building, and then he would just casually throw a USB device out the elevator and go through. Just throw it on the lobby floor. This would for a very long time. This hacker was actually caught, but for a very long time he was able to evade the security cameras because of the sophisticated approach that he took to making sure that he could keep his identity away from the cameras, and he did a very good job of just every day for about 10 days throwing this USB drive out of the elevator as the elevator went through the floors. On the 8th day, which is they actually went through the cameras and figured this piece out over time. On the 8th day, someone came out of the elevator, saw a USB drive, picked it up, walked it into the office, passed all the security, assumed it belonged to one of the senior management people, went and casually left it on his desk, and did not even have a conversation with him from where it came from. The CFO of that company walked into his office that day and saw the USB drive. He's on camera. He picks it up. He reads it. You see the excitement in his face, and he pops it right into his laptop, right there, his desktop, and sits and spends, I believe it was 8.5 minutes, scrolling through all these pictures of Ferraris and Lamborghinis as the malware is being deployed inside the infrastructure. Of which it took 150 days before they realized that it even happened. A bunch of machines became compromised, and ultimately, as the CEO was very close, actually should turn this into a blog or white paper and send it to people because I have some understanding of this. But ultimately, the CEO of the company was actually about to fire the CIO as well as the CISO of the company, as well as most of the security team, before the forensics team realized that it was the CFO's fault, which is a crazy story to me. That's probably the best one I got.
That is a crazy story, but you raise an interesting point, is when an organization has an incident, whether it's one of the big names we've seen in the news or something else, so oftentimes the organization wants to go ahead and fire one individual, the team, or whomever to show that they've done something. But what I think is interesting and rather unfortunate is when you've made an egregious mistake, you tend not to repeat that same mistake again. So oftentimes those people become some of the most valuable you have. So I wish maybe people would rethink that, because now that you've made the mistake, you're not going to do it again. You let go that individual, or perhaps the security team, bring in somebody else, and there you go. You're going to have the same scenario again. So maybe rethink a little bit. Is there a lesson learned we can learn from it and find a way to move forward and just everyone get a little wiser?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've all touched upon one piece, and maybe we'll close out here with one or two more stories, and then I'd love actually to probably maybe get Fatih's feedback here, if it makes sense. The reality of the world that we are now evolving into is one of a connected world, and everything is connected to a sensor, to a port, and the idea of just protecting, certain avenues or certain vectors, or thinking that when we find a problem, we're just going to remediate it, and it becomes a lot of heavy lifting to either change the policy or change the procedure when ultimately that attack could have been stopped on the forefront and could have been stopped way in advance if there was some either better technology or a better human element of understanding kind of a company culture of security, because I think all of us have brought up interesting examples of where people who are not the cybersecurity people, like the folks on this call and beyond, are the ones making the mistakes versus, but I'm sure there's probably plenty of crazy stories where the cybersecurity person makes equal, if not greater, mistakes. Fati, let me ask you a question.
One. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go for your story, and we'll close out with Fati.
You got it. All right. So there's one where an organization had a laptop that malfunctioned. The hard drive wasn't working properly. So they took the laptop and they sent it out to go ahead and have the laptop fixed. What they didn't think about is they didn't wipe the hard drive before they had it sent out, and it had the PII of 76 million of our esteemed servicemen on this particular laptop. It was from the National Archives, and so somebody was able to go ahead and abscond with all of that information. So the PII of 76 million service people, and that's the thing, 46% of information that's lost can be traced back to contractors or third-party people who just don't have the same interest in protecting the data that we have for our organization. So it's fine to go ahead and get that hard drive repaired, but just make sure you realize what's on it before you hand it over to someone else, because not everyone in the world has that same set of importance or integrity that you take when it's your data.
Ouch. That's a good one. We got a few more minutes. Theresa, do you have any more you would like to share on your end?
Oh,
and the answer could be no.
I do want to tag on to what Karen said. It's important to understand what you're doing, and users are probably our most vulnerable, because to them the technology is a tool. And they don't care how it works, just as long as it works and it gets the job done. So the education and the training are critical in getting them to understand why they need to do what is important to protect that data. It can be their data, it can be the company's data, it can be somebody else's data. They just need to understand that there are ways that it can be protected and to employ those ways.
Absolutely. I could not have said that better. So thank you for that comment. I appreciate it. Fati, I want to ask you a specific question because ultimately you spend more time in this space and trying to solve these challenges than any of us combined. As for the folks on the call, as we're moving into this era of a, technology, revolution, I would say similar to the Industrial Revolution, but now it's very technology driven. Now that we're in this moving towards everything connected world, smart cities, the Internet of Things, obviously there's some craziness to some of these stories, but what are some of the things that you think about that people could take as either an action item or something for them to think about for thinking about how to secure a connected world?
Thank you. I guess the fundamental things that we have to think are make changes in the way we think, the way we have been trained. The detection has been very key so far in defending enterprises, but it is very clear detection is no longer effective methodology. We have to look into more preventive techniques. As in the case of a data breach examples, the data has been exposed because of the laptop. We have to look into, in the connected world, sealing the data when it is generated. So we are looking into those kind of new frontier technologies with our what we call Trustica IoT platform, smart cities. In that world, instead of trying to put data in silos, seal the data at the moment it's generated, bind that data into the user or to the identity, and then that data will never be able to be exposed because the people who owns that data will continue to be able to protect it implicitly, as opposed to storing in the databases, trying to encrypt that data. This is what we call there is no more perimeter. There is no more the things that you can put firewalls around information. So you everything is, all those walls are broken. So how can you work in that kind of environment? That is the connected world. The data has to be sealed at the moment it is generated. Prevention as opposed to detection. Those are the areas I think we all have to be aligning our thoughts and move forward. That is where we are working right now actively in our Trustica platform for the connected world with our AppGuard technology for prevention, not a detection. It is too late to prevent, to detect. You have to prevent it first. It's too late to look for patches. You have to prevent. So the patches can be staged and the vulnerabilities can be isolated without they become a risk for the enterprise.
Thank you, Fatih. I appreciate your contribution to the conversation, and I think it's a very, very fair and accurate statement. The idea of, even whether it's your health, whether it's your company, in every lens or every sphere of our life, there is preventative maintenance. Preventative actions are always less expensive than being reactive and cleaning up the mess afterwards. So I think there's an efficiency to that. I think there's a value to it, as well as the cost of remediation has been proven over and over again to be very, very expensive. All right, I want to be conscious of everyone's time today. I want to give a special thank you to our contributors. We are recording this. We will share a copy of it on social media as well. And if anyone would like to get a copy for themselves to send out to people within their organization or to people that they might see value in it, then feel free to ping us and we'll make sure to get everybody a copy. And again, if you have a idea or topic that you would like to hear more about, please do send it to us. Please tweet it on Twitter and tag us to it. We monitor all those channels. And for everyone else, we hope you have a great Thanksgiving and a very safe and secure week.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Have a great holiday, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great holiday, everyone.
Thank you.
Are you guys still on?
I am.
Yes, sir.
You guys are awesome.
No, you